All right, great to be with my brother, my friend Joseph Kopser of USTomorrow and Other Identities,
And
um,
other things. Good to see you, Todd.
and
Good to be
other
back with
things.
you.
Joseph and I go back years from Bunker Labs and helping veteran entrepreneurs, of which Joseph is one. He's also a former candidate for Congress, and he's the founder of USTomorrow. Joseph, what's going on?
All kinds of things. All of them are good. It's great to be talking to you. Obviously, as you mentioned, we go on the Wayback Machine. I was thinking back prior to the recording, 2014. This summer, right now in Chicago, is when we met. When you were establishing Bunker Labs, and I was proud to be a part of the first cohort of what you built.
Yeah, and it's amazing, Joseph, because you are someone that I think just is out in the world trying to do good to serve this country, and I've seen you do that through seasons of your life, and I think you and I kind of find each other, and there's a whole group of us that find each
Yep.
other, I think, throughout these seasons of life where we're trying to start businesses, but always also try to make moves that we think can help move this country forward and keep us on track. And so you ran for Congress, and I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what you learned, and then we'll get into sort of your vision for the future. And we'll talk about election reform because that's
Yeah.
obviously what I think our audience cares about. But you ran for office in 2018 as a Democrat, came up short. What did the experience teach you about electoral politics in the state of this country?
Oh, well, first of all, it's a great question to tee it all up. But I want to remind your viewers who may be new to you and new to what you're working on, but your journey is very similar. Served in the military, got into the private sector. Even before that, you were in public service, set up Bunker Labs, really evangelized the opportunities for people to participate in the American dream, especially among veterans, because we all raised our hand to serve in the military to protect the American dream, especially that of free enterprise and being a part of a better solution. And then when your run there was done, then you tried to return back to public service again. And then now you're doing what you are with VPI. So yeah, when you talk about brothers from other mothers, I think we're probably twins in that regard. But your question was what I learned in the process. Well, what I learned was A, somewhat surprising, and B, no surprise at all. So for those that don't know me, my background, real simple, grew up as a kid, just totally in love with all things American government. When I was in the fourth grade, my parents sent me on a trip to Washington, D.C. to visit my Uncle Robert, who was a career diplomat with the State Department. And here he had this fourth grade sponge of American history and American government at his fingertips. And he took me everywhere across Washington, D.C. And at that formative age, you can't help but fall in love with American government. He took me Supreme Court, the Pentagon, when you could still walk in pre 9/11. He took me to halls of Congress. He took me everywhere at Smithsonian. It just was so inspiring. So that was my worldview. That was my outlook, which was greatest nation in the world. What can we do to make it better? It led to my attendance at West Point, 20 years in the American Army, a couple of trips through Iraq. Got not just muddy boots time in the military, but also got to be a part of some senior leaders' vision for helping build a better army. And all of that just transformed my worldview to say, no matter what your background was, you really can be a part, as Hamilton would say, in the room where it happened. And that led to business, that led to Ride Scout, that led to me working with you all those years ago and with the Bunker. And then since trying to help other veterans build their companies. But that's when, for this, kid that grew up a Ronald Reagan Republican, that got me into 2015, 2016 time. I was having fun in business. And that's when Trump started to come along, and he had that populist appeal that I knew was really a snake oil salesman slash, carnival barker, meaning it was less about what he was really selling and it was all more about him. And I kept trying to raise my hand and tell my fellow Republicans and friends, hey, this guy's not really what he reports to be. And Todd, I have it on personal experience because in the 80s, when he came out with The Art of the Deal, I fell in love with the guy. Like I read every book he put out thinking that's what leadership was. And oh my gosh, how wrong was I? So going back to your question, what did I learn? What I learned was there's a lot of people who love this country, but are easily either fooled or tricked, or they trick themselves into believing a false narrative or believing something that's just not the case. And then sometimes worse, we have a political industrial complex that just loves the status quo. Like they have almost no incentive to change anything, because if you were to be at the top of the pyramid, why the hell do you want to change what got you to where you were? And there are very few mavericks, and I mean that literally, that are willing to buck the system. So you can imagine my friends and family when I came out literally and said, I'm a Democrat now running for Congress. It just blew their minds. In fact, my step grandfather, still alive to this day, 97 years old, didn't even give me $1 in the campaign. He's like, oh, I thought you were a Republican. My Grandpa Charlie, you've known me for 35 years. What suddenly changed because there was a D or an R behind my name? So I learned a lot of those things, and I'm happy to go into details in any of them, but it was an eye-opening experience, needless to say.
You know, it's funny. I didn't know the fourth grade story, but my journey is similar. I was so fixated and just oddly patriotic as a young kid on sort of this American experience in this country. I won a C-SPAN essay contest in 7th grade.
Now, can I find it if I go looking for it?
Yeah, it's on the web.
Okay.
I won a TV, literally, and this is like unbeknownst to my parents. I'm up in my bedroom watching C-SPAN as a kid, while mom's watching, LA Law or something, downstairs, and I'm applying for C-SPAN essay contest, winning, and we got a TV that came to the house, and my mom's like, "Did you buy a TV?" And I was like, "No, I won a C-SPAN essay contest," and she's like, "What's C-SPAN?" It was funny. That those kernels of truth. And then I was a congressional page in high school, which was such a transformative experience. I was on the floor of the House of Representatives for 9 months, and this was during the Republican takeover when Newt Gingrich became Speaker, and I was a Republican page working for my Republican member. And every morning I'd go and raise the flag over the U.S. House of Representatives on the roof of the Capitol building. I mean, it was just such a searing, inspiring experience. And I think, for me, similar to you, just led me to like join the Navy and do the things that I do. And full circle to today's political environment is like, it's not about what party you're from. It's like, you're not carrying water for the Democratic Party, nor am I. This is not about a party identity. It's more about like a nostalgia for a country that, and I saw it, in the House of Representatives, members that just work together to do the right thing. And not always, but sure, generally. And it's so heartbreaking when you look at the situation that we're in, where just the toxic political behavior, people being weaponized, sort of cult-like loyalty to both parties that just feels so foreign to, I think, what we saw, 20, 30 years ago. So how do let's get into like, so you had that experience, you saw tribal loyalties play out, you're trying to be a reasonable guy, you have to pick a team, you align to a team, but you also are your own person. How did you go to that, from that to springboarding into USTomorrow, and what do you think is the path out of the mess that we're in?
Yeah. Wow. Those are 3 great questions. Let me try to take each one individually. So one of the things that I learned specifically tactically was how badly the primary system as set up today in most places in the US hurt politics. I mean, the primary system is so weirdly arranged that, for instance, in my race, Texas 21, which is Austin, San Antonio, and the Hill Country, easily one of the most gorgeous districts in all the country. And I stood in San Marcos, Texas, in front of the first political audience ever, early in the primary. I said, "Hi, I'm Joseph Kopser, running for, mind you, Democratic primary." And I said, "I'm Joseph Kopser, former Republican, 20-year Army businessman running for Congress." They practically booed me out of the room. And I'm like, wait, what of those 3 was it? And I literally was, again, first experience ever in front of a political audience. And it was the former Republican part. And I'm like, yeah, former, like let's get on that. So what I realized is that there were so many people that participate so passionately in the primaries that they are the diehards, and then next to them are, unfortunately, the wingnuts. Now the wingnuts are even further out, but because so few people participate in primaries, the candidates that are emerging in districts where they're gerrymandered, especially, are producing a twisted or a tweaked version of what reality looks like. And I'm a big believer in the bell curve. Another thing that I took away from that campaign was when the dust did settle At the time in Texas, there's 36 congressional districts, 36. Our campaign, received more votes than any Democratic candidate in Texas in 2018. And depending on how you do the math, more votes than any Texas Democrat in the history of midterm elections in the state of Texas. And I still lost. 12 Democrats in the state did win, but they were lower than us in the vote count. So that kind of got me fired up. And so your last question was, what led to US Tomorrow? What led to US Tomorrow was, in places like San Antonio, my district was heavily Republican, but I damn near beat my Republican opponent in almost every precinct and beat him in a few and took away tons of votes, which is why we were able to garner more votes than any Democrat running, because we had Republicans, independents, Democrats, because our message was about jobs, education, and our kids' future. And my tagline, the last commercial I ran that I wish I had more time and money to have run it more, was, if I can cross oceans and deserts in service to country, I can cross the aisle when I need to get what we need better for our communities and for the state of Texas and the U.S. And that story resonated. That's why we have received so many votes. And so I said, well, what do I do now? And so US Tomorrow was created as a nonprofit to stay engaged, to stay plugged in. I wasn't taking my toys and going home. And I understand some, when they lose, understandably, they go back to their regular lives, because politics is grueling, as you know. But I didn't want to leave, and I wanted to keep one foot in the door to continue to contribute, because like you, I'm a young guy. At least
you're, I think as an entrepreneur, something that I think you and I have in common is like we have, you certainly do. I won't give myself credit, but certainly like you have a systems level view of how things work. And I think most people that are in the military have like a system level view, right? Like if you're looking at a company and the employees are behaving badly, like your first question is like, well, what's the compensation structure like? And how are we onboarding
people? You're exactly right. All systems essentially come down to process and people.
Right.
Can you figure out the process, and can you align the people, incentivize them, like you just said, to move forward? Problem is, in our politics today, in too many places, even the process is broken. Even good people that want to get involved, the process itself is broken, because at the top, the political industrial complex has almost zero incentive to make it better. Almost.
So let's talk about this. So from a systems level view, because that's, I think, where I've spent the last 4 years looking and just like analyzing and saying, you have good people that run on both sides of the aisle. They often don't break through. A lot of would-be good people don't run because they're rational to know that they can't break through. I mean, even if the good ones do break through and occasionally reach across the aisle, they're setting themselves up for failure, because they're going to be primaried and probably lose their next election, right? So with that systems thinking hat on, what do you look at the American system now? What do you think what are solutions? And I want to throw a few things out there, because I think it's a season. If you're a patriot, you got to have a theory of the case about how you move the country forward. Some people think it's just about, we got more candidate recruitment. The left prevailing narrative is about election ballot access, more drop boxes, et cetera. The right's prevailing narrative is around election security, more security. There's talk about gerrymandering, money in politics, term limits, election reform. What's the option set that you see, and what actually animates you as being real solutions?
Yeah. So I don't know if your viewers or listeners are familiar with the book Moneyball, but I look at this from a Moneyball standpoint to figure out, where can you take the data? What can you glean from the data to help you figure out where are the corner cases where you can fix small things that have huge leverage in the future? And that's why I'm a big fan of, and we talked about this in the green room beforehand, what are the small tweaks you can make that other people can see its positive impact and go, that's actually pretty cool. What can I do? My favorite example recently was up in Alaska with the Sarah Palin election, and how she had just locked down that 30% of the wingnuts who just love Sarah Palin. And there was another moderate Republican, and then there was a rather moderate Democrat in the race. And because of their system, which we can talk about, she lost. In fact, both Republicans lost and ended up being the Democrat, because of the ranked choice voting and the way those Alaska laws were set up by their legislature, which I think is phenomenal. And if more people can imagine what it looks like, if if voters are drawn back to politics, because what we really have as a problem is voter apathy due to a unfounded but still understandable belief that their vote doesn't matter. I mean, as I like to point out, and it breaks my heart every time, where my kids went to high school, their football stadium holds more seats than I lost by. And so just to imagine a high school stadium full of parents and voters could have swayed the election and we wouldn't have Chip Roy today in Congress. But because a football stadium's worth of people stayed at home, we're sitting where we are, 9,000 people. Not that I'm bitter, not that I still think about it.
Let's stay on sports for a second, because I want to give folks a mental model. You and I were talking about this. Like, let's talk about the new innovation in baseball. Most people, when they think about baseball, they're watching a game. Most people are in the stands not thinking about the rules of the game as constructed. I think you and I are thinking about the rules of the game. So give us the baseball metaphor and the new pitch clock.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that over the years, we've become so scientific about pitchers and pitching and placement that managers become so very fixed on the right pitcher for the right batter and thinking through each play and each permutation, commutation. It's making so that in the stands, the fans don't realize it, but between pitches, it got to be horrible, leading to these games that were going 4 and 5 hours sometimes. And your fan base was walking away, literally. Again, the way the process was designed, fans walking away. The metaphor here is the way the political process set up, especially in the primaries. If people don't think their vote counts, they're walking away. And who's walking away the most are in the middle of that bell curve. But when they change the pitch clock and pitchers have to pitch faster, the game moves. And Major League Baseball is already starting to see return of attendance, return of viewership in a way that, had it not been for that small innovation, they wouldn't be where they are now.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. And there's the book by Catherine Gale and Michael Porter, The Politics Industry. Yeah, it's just it talks as well about the 3-point shot in basketball to introduce player diversity. And now people had, like, it just sped up the game. It created interesting dynamics, introducing the shot clock, same thing. And politics is just at a place where it's stuck. And the quick education I would do is just, like, we have this, and in fact, the political industrial complex kind of tells us that our elections, as archaic as they are supposed to just be this way, and it's just, it's a giant fallacy that is not true. Every state can determine how to conduct their elections. Every state does them differently. We didn't used to have direct primaries. Progressive, era, reformers fought for it. We got progressive primaries. The parties over the course of decades figure out how to kind of capture control and protect incumbents.
Constitutional amendment that allowed for the direct popular election of senators. I mean, we could go on and on about little changes over time. Now, with each one of those, don't even get me started, but there's a fabulous YouTube documentary I saw, or I should say it was a documentary and it's now on YouTube, about the history of the Dakotas, North and South, and how it was done, that division of that territory for no reason other than to add more senators to the mix. I mean, that kind of purposeful, and I would say corrosive manipulation of the system to game it just needs to be slowly undone in whatever best way we can. We could talk about the Supreme Court, lifetime appointments. Whew, don't get me started. We got all kinds of stuff we could get into.
So how do we take, okay, so final five voting is something that I'm in love with. I think you are too. It's the combination of an open single ballot primary, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Texas majority party, all run on one ballot. You vote for your favorite candidate. The top five go to the general, and then you choose the candidates you like in the order in which you like them. It's not complicated. They did it in Alaska. Voters liked it. They got better choices. I will say too that they elected a moderate Democrat, a moderate Republican to the U.S. Senate, Lisa Murkowski, reelected, and then a conservative Republican governor. Same voters, different candidates, but they were all like the adults in the room. They were the serious candidates. They weren't the performative candidates.
As Liz Cheney would say, the serious candidates. We need more serious people in D.C.
Serious, workhorses, not show horses. So it works. We have evidence that it works. How do you take an issue like that is so technical, but also so powerful? And how do we bring this mainstream to the disaffected, moderate, reasonable majority who are checking out? Because they're like, I don't get it. it does seem scripted. I don't, it seems extreme. My vote doesn't seem to matter, which unfortunately, here's where I'll push back. It's not irrational as a moderate centrist voter to not want to vote in a general election because 83% of districts are either gerrymandered or geo-sorted. It is predetermined to mostly be the Republican or the Democrat, right? So they're not actually they're not irrational. They're making somewhat of a calculated decision. It's like, I don't, this thing's pre-baked because the winners in the primary.
We've got a attorney general, and I'll answer your question in a second, but I really want to illustrate it for people who aren't following it closely. We have an attorney general in the state of Texas that has just been impeached by the Texas legislature. The Texas Senate that will serve as jury for his trial has just announced their rules last week as we're doing the taping of this recording. So hopefully by the time, people really pick up this video, the trial will be underway. But he has been indicted, but never gone to trial for the last 8 years on 5 or 6 different counts, from fraud to embezzlement to all kinds of problems. And then there's the character issues that we won't even get into. But because less than 3 million Texans participate in a statewide election that should have 33 million people in our population, understandably, they're not all eligible voters. But we have less than what basically, when you do the math, it comes out to less than 3% of the Texas population chooses in Republican primary who's going to be our elected officials, because by the time it gets to the general, it's just so terrible. So to answer your question, it needs, especially in the bigger states, needs to be major concerted efforts. I'm talking about big PACs, big groups, corporations, groups getting involved to be able to make a massive voter education campaign, because I truly believe that in states that are way too far left or right, they're not going to bring this in, because those state legislatures that pass those rules have very little incentive to change it. Now, I'm still optimistic about Texas, because as the Texas population continues to change, recently I learned that Hispanic voters are now the majority population. Hispanic people are the majority population, not yet voters. That's going to have an outsized impact, neither Democrat nor Republican, but just an outsized impact. So the sooner that moderates can get in front of all this and say, hey, regardless of how it turns out, I want things like ranked choice voting to ensure that the middle of the bell curve always wins, no matter which way our state goes, left or right. Anyway, long answer to your simple question.
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think what we're in the business of doing is trying to stoke a revolution of the rational and make sure that centrist, which is really where America is. America's in the middle, and it's good. It's good to have extreme voices, no problem, but they should not be the government. They shouldn't.
I want them in think tanks. Yeah, I want to read their books and their articles. I want them to spark ideas and create music and create controversy. I don't want them to do it from the Oval Office.
Right. And we don't want them hijacking our political apparatus and creating just destructive, burn it all down kind of politics. It's so not helpful. So this revolution of the rational, I think you're right. I think it's got to come from the business community. I think it's got to come from even within the parties themselves, who know that the extreme wings of their party have a role to play, but they shouldn't be right at the head of the table in every conversation.
Can I give you a great example of that?
Yeah, please.
So after 2018, again, like I said, our campaign received more votes than any Texas Democrat running for Congress that year. Former Republican running on a message of jobs, education, our kids' future. The apparatus, the senior leadership of the Texas Democratic Party never reached out to me to ask how did I do that. Never did. No interest in that leadership at that time. Now, the good news is we've got some rumblings of some cool new people running for leadership here in the Texas Democratic Party, but no interest. It's like, how do you not learn from previous elections and keep that voter data? Which is why I'm so excited about startups like Civitech with Jeremy Smith, who I know and what he's trying to do to use data, to use technology to bring that revolution of what'd you call it again? The radical revolution?
Of the rational.
Oh, the rational, excuse me, the rational. It's just, It's just common sense. It's data. And to go back to your sports analogy, everybody loves sports, but most Americans are able, when the game is over and the weekend is done, to take off that jersey and go about their lives. And Philly fans can still talk to, New York Giants fans. But on the field of friendly strife, sure, have fun, paint your face, hoot and holler, boo if you like. But why people wear their political jersey around every day of their life and don't admit that there could be faults in their own team or there could be things they could learn from the other team drive me bonkers.
I know. And I've come to see folks that are just in that way painted so heavily as like almost victims of this duopoly apparatus that is like taking control of their minds. And it's actually a sad phenomenon. We got to break people out of it. I'm going to give my last comment and then I want to get your last comment. So my last comment is, I think if you're a patriot in this moment, you live in the United States, it's 2023, you have to get tuned into election reform. If you're wondering what's the path out, stop hoping for saviors. Stop just sending, flooding the zone with money towards elections in places that you're never even going to go visit. That's part of continuing this sort of that's an investment in the status quo. Become interested in structural reforms that change the incentive structure. We have to stop hoping that people do the right thing in spite of the incentives and start just assuming that people are going to do whatever the incentives tell them. So how do we create an environment in which you do the right thing because the incentives are aligned to do the right thing? But what's your playbook? What do you tell folks, Joseph, who are
so the first thing I do is I tell them to let me rephrase it. I tell them, yes, please continue to talk about politics. I talk to so many people like, I don't even bring politics up at the table. I don't even bring it up at work anymore. I'm like, no. Please do. Because it is in that silence, that deafening silence, that the crazies, they're going to fill that void. They're going to fill that void with their crazy talk. So that's the first thing. Do talk about politics. Do seek out people of different opinions. I mean, out on the campaign trail, anytime I'd mention that, where do I get my news? I get it from everywhere. I say I just as easily on an evening watch MSNBC as I'm watching Fox News. People are like, ooh. I'm like, yeah, but how do you know how the other groups and folks are organizing their ideas? So that's the other thing I'd say, which is seek out people you don't quite understand. And then thirdly, I really encourage people to go back to history. I'll end on this note. Robert Putnam, who wrote an amazing book in the 90s called Bowling Alone. And what he basically said is, holy cow, folks, Americans aren't getting together in clubs like they used to. And he has all the data from the Kiwanis to Rotary Club and everything. And you can track all these. And then what he said, well, what's the downside of all that? And it led to a book called Our Kids. And it basically means that our kids are getting left behind because in the old days, the banker's kid and the mechanic's kid not only lived in the same neighborhood, but they probably and oftentimes lived on the same street, which meant if the mechanic was working late and and the parent couldn't be at the PTA meeting, don't worry, the banker was there and the banker was going to make sure that the best things happened for the kids at that school. Well, last 50 years, everybody's moved to their own corners. Everybody's living in their own neighborhoods. Now there's very little chance the mechanic kid and the banker kid are living on the same street and their schools are suffering because of it. So that was his next really big piece. His most recent piece, which is called The Upswing, says, okay, if all that's true that we're going down, what can we do to make that curve go back up again in terms of participation and engagement? And he looked for the use of the word I versus we in written text and transcripts. And they did a Google search and they counted all the use of I versus we. And we were very much in an I moment, but we were in a we moment at the peak of the 60s, we working together, we the people. And in doing that, he realized, wait, when were we last using I a lot? And he went backwards in time. What did he find? The Gilded Age, the robber barons, out of control industry, worker conditions that were horrible, sweatshops, kids, children being employed in factories and in mines. And yet, young Americans, led by young Americans in their 20s and 30s, in the early teens, said, enough of that. And they started getting involved. They started mobilizing, and he showed how we had an upswing. So it can be done. So that's why I say the third thing is for people to remain optimistic, look back to history of how we fixed it before, because we're going to have to fix it going forward, because I refuse to accept the downward trend as inevitable.
We can't accept it. And who better, I think, than the military community, those that have been in ships alongside, that metaphor of being alongside folks from very different walks of life is still alive and well in the military, but is not available for a lot of folks in other aspects of America, which is why you and I remain hopeful, because we do have friends from all walks of life, all political identities, and we see people for who they are as friends and as Americans. And so, Joseph, I love talking to you. It keeps me energized and inspired. We do have work to do to fix this country, but that's what you and I are here for. So great to be
Sounds
with
like a plan. Thanks for having me on, Todd.
you. Thanks, bud.